She said my dog is smarter than you in front of nearly 50 people, and her father just laughed. I bent down, picked up the spilled water bottles, and walked out of the strategy meeting for good. They had no idea that the only thing keeping their company alive for 11 years was locked inside my mind. The real oops was not my departure. It was the moment they realized they had just deleted their own power button. My name is Ruby Stewart, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the invisible glue holding a multi-million-dollar furniture empire together. Now, I am just the woman standing outside Pine Hollow Lodge without a coat, watching my breath turn into white clouds against the darkening sky. The cold mountain air bites at my skin, sharp and unforgiving, but it feels better than the suffocating heat of the conference room I just left. Inside that rustic timber-framed hall, 47 people are currently pretending that what just happened was funny. They are pretending that cruelty is a form of leadership. They are wrong. It was day 2 of the Marrow Slate Living Annual Strategy Summit. We were 3 hours north of the city, isolated in a luxury retreat that cost more per night than most of our warehouse workers made in a month. The theme of the weekend was synergy and vision. The reality was heavy drinking, forced team-building exercises, and listening to the executive team congratulate themselves for profits that were actually generated by the people they did not invite. I was only there because Gordon Kincaid, our CEO, insisted that someone needed to be on hand to answer logistical questions if they came up. I was not there to strategize. I was there to be a walking filing cabinet. The afternoon session was led by Blair Kincaid. At 26 years old, Blair was the newly appointed brand strategy lead. She was also Gordon's daughter. She stood on the raised platform at the front of the room, pacing back and forth in heels that were impractical for the uneven wooden floor. She was presenting the launch plan for the Founders Edition, a new line of ultra-high-end furniture intended to celebrate the company's heritage. The irony was that Blair knew nothing about heritage. She knew about Instagram aesthetics and burning through marketing budgets. I sat in the back row, taking notes on a tablet. I had already flagged 5 major supply chain issues with her proposal just by looking at her opening slides. She wanted Italian marble sourced in 3 weeks. She wanted hand-stitched leather from a tannery that had a 6-month waiting list. She was promising delivery dates that were physically impossible unless we invented teleportation. I kept my mouth shut, planning to email the operations director later to quietly fix the mess before it became a disaster. That was my job. I fixed things. I made the impossible happen quietly, so that people like Blair could look competent. Blair was in the middle of a passionate speech about disrupting the living room space. She threw her hands out wide to emphasize the grandeur of her vision. It was a theatrical gesture, rehearsed and dramatic, but she had misjudged her proximity to the side table. Her hand struck a cluster of premium glass water bottles, the expensive imported kind that Gordon insisted on having at every meeting. The sound was aggressive. Glass shattered against the hardwood. Water sprayed across the front of the stage and soaked the hem of Blair's silk trousers. The heavy thud of the bottles hitting the floor echoed in the high-ceilinged room. The presentation stopped dead. Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. The silence was absolute. 47 heads turned toward the stage. Blair looked down at the mess, her face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with annoyance. She looked at the water soaking into the expensive rug. Then, she looked up. Her eyes scanned the room, bypassing the maintenance staff standing by the door, bypassing the junior assistants in the second row. Her gaze landed directly on me in the back corner. "Pick it up," she said. Her voice was calm. It was not a request. It was the tone one uses for a disobedient pet or a malfunctioning appliance. The room remained frozen. My heart hammered against my ribs. A slow, heavy rhythm. I looked at Gordon Kincaid, sitting in the front row. He was the CEO. He was the man who had employed me for 11 years. He knew that I managed the relationships with 17 critical vendors. He knew that I was the reason our last 3 product launches had arrived on time. I waited for him to speak. I waited for him to tell his daughter that the vendor relations coordinator was not a janitor. Gordon did not speak. He just watched, a faint amusement playing on his lips, curious to see if I would obey. I felt the weight of 47 pairs of eyes on me. Some were sympathetic, looking down at their laps. Others, the ambitious middle managers who wanted to climb the ladder, watched with rapt attention. This was a test of loyalty. In the culture of Marrow Slate, humiliation was the price of admission to the inner circle. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. I walked down the center aisle. My footsteps were steady. I told myself I was a professional. I told myself that making a scene would only hurt my career. I told myself that I had a son at home who needed this salary. I reached the front of the room. I walked onto the stage. The water was cold around my ankles. I crouched down. I began to pick up the large shards of glass. I was careful. I piled them onto a dry section of the table. I grabbed a napkin from the service tray and blotted the worst of the puddle so no one would slip. I was down on one knee, wiping the floor, when Blair spoke again. She had turned back to the audience, regaining her composure, but her microphone was still hot. She leaned toward the vice president of sales, who was sitting near her feet, and spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. "My dog is smarter than you," she said. She gestured loosely at me with her laser pointer. "I mean, at least he comes when I call him without looking like he's doing me a favor." I froze. My hand was hovering over a piece of broken glass. From the front row, a sound erupted. It was a laugh. A deep, guttural chortle. It was Gordon. He was red in the face, slapping his knee. "That is a good one. Honey," Gordon boomed. "The dam broke." Following the CEO's lead, the room exploded into laughter. The VP of sales chuckled. The marketing team giggled. It was a wave of sycophantic noise, washing over me while I knelt on the floor. They were laughing at me. They were laughing at the woman who negotiated their contracts, who saved their margins, who remembered their birthdays. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was a quiet, final click, like a lock turning. I did not look up at Blair. I did not look at Gordon. I stood up slowly. I placed the wet napkin on the table next to the broken glass. I wiped my hands on my skirt. I turned around and faced the room. The laughter died down slightly. Uncertainly, as they saw my expression, I did not look angry. I did not look sad. I felt entirely, perfectly numb. "Where are you going?" Ruby Gordon asked, still chuckling. "We are not done here." I did not answer. I walked down the stairs of the stage. I walked back up the center aisle. I did not look left or right. I walked past the managers, past the directors, past the VPs. "Ruby, sit down," Gordon called out. His voice had lost the humor. It was an order now. I kept walking. I reached the heavy double doors at the back of the room. I pushed them open. The cold air from the hallway hit my face. You walk out that door, and you are done. "Ruby," Gordon shouted. I let the door swing shut behind me, cutting off his voice. I kept walking, through the lobby, past the reception desk where the staff looked at me with concern, out the main entrance. Now I am standing here, by my car. The wind is howling through the pine trees. My hands are shaking, but not from the cold. They are shaking from the adrenaline of pure, unadulterated clarity. I can still hear the phantom echo of that laughter. They think they just put a subordinate in her place. They think power is about who cleans up the mess. I reach into my pocket for my car keys. My phone buzzes with a notification, probably an email from HR, or a text from a colleague asking if I'm crazy. I ignore it. I look back at the lodge, glowing warm and golden in the twilight. Inside, they are likely returning to their presentation, confident that the unpleasantness is over. They believe the machinery of their company will keep turning tomorrow just as it did yesterday. They believe they are the engine. If you think this was just an insult, you have not seen what they dropped along with those water bottles. To understand why I walked away from my career with nothing but the clothes on my back and a terrifying sense of liberation, you have to understand how I walked through those doors in the first place. It was 11 years ago. I was 29 years old, and my life was a chaotic mess of cardboard boxes and legal paperwork. My divorce had just been finalized, leaving me with a bruised ego, a depleted bank account, and sole custody of my 6-year-old son. I was not the hardened strategist who just humiliated a CEO at a mountain retreat. Back then, I was desperate. I was a woman who checked her grocery receipt 3 times to make sure she had not gone over budget. I needed stability. I needed health insurance. I needed to know that when I turned on the lights in our cramped apartment, they would actually come on. When Marrow Slate Living offered me the position of vendor relations coordinator, I nearly cried with relief in the HR office. The title sounded important. It sounded steady. I imagined spreadsheets, organized filing cabinets, and a clear set of rules. I imagined a corporate ladder that I could climb one sensible rung at a time. I was naive. On my 3rd day, the woman I was replacing pulled me aside. Her name was Darlene Wyatt. She was 63 years old, with hair dyed a defiant shade of red, and a face etched with the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from managing other people's crises for 2 decades. She was retiring, heading to Florida to live near her grandchildren, and she looked like a prisoner who had just seen the warden unlock the gate. "Come with me," Darlene said. She did not take me to her desk. She took me to the loading dock, away from the prying ears of the open plan office. She lit a cigarette, even though it was a smoke-free campus, and looked at me with a mixture of pity and serious intensity. "You seem like a smart girl." "Ruby," she said, exhaling a plume of gray smoke. "So I am going to tell you the truth. If you try to do this job the way the employee handbook says, you will be fired in 3 months." I stared at her, clutching my notebook. I asked her what she meant. Darlene laughed, a dry hacking sound. She told me that Marrow Slate did not run on logistics. It did not run on standard operating procedures or robust legal frameworks. It ran on the chaotic whims of Gordon Kincaid. "Gordon is cheap," Darlene said flatly. "He hates lawyers. He hates contracts. He hates paying for software licenses. He thinks systems are for people who lack charisma." She explained that while we were a multi-million-dollar furniture company, our supply chain was held together by handshakes and phone calls. We did not have a central database for our vendors. We did not have formal service-level agreements with the sawmills in North Carolina or the textile weavers in New Mexico. We had email threads. We had sticky notes. We had the contact list in Darlene's personal cell phone. I asked her how we tracked orders. I asked how we held vendors accountable if a shipment was late or the quality was poor. Darlene tapped her temple with a manicured fingernail. "It is all in here," she said. Then she began the real training. For the next 2 weeks, Darlene did not show me how to use the computer system, because there really was not one to show. Instead, she taught me the human geography of our supply chain. She taught me that the owner of the metal fabrication shop in Ohio was going through a messy custody battle, so you never called him before 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. She taught me that the leather tannery in Pennsylvania always had cash flow issues in November, so if we prepaid 20%, they would prioritize our order over everyone else. She taught me that the master carpenter at our main woodshop was proud and hated being rushed, but if you asked him about his vintage motorcycle restoration project first, he would work overtime for free. It was not data. It was gossip. It was psychology. It was a complex web of favors, secrets, and emotional leverage. I remember looking at the pile of loose invoices and scribbled notes on her desk and feeling a cold knot of anxiety in my stomach. "This is dangerous," I told her. "If something happens to you, the company stops. That is the point," Darlene said. She crushed her cigarette under her heel. "Listen to me. Gordon will never pay you what you are worth. He will never give you a title that reflects what you actually do. But as long as you are the only one who knows that the fabric guy needs his check mailed to his mother's address to hide it from the IRS, Gordon cannot fire you." I looked at her, horrified. It went against every professional instinct I had. It was chaotic. It was inefficient. It was a ticking time bomb. "What if I want to take a vacation?" I asked. "What if I get sick?" "Then they suffer until you come back." Darlene shrugged. "And they realize they need you." I wanted to reject her advice. I wanted to build a proper system. I wanted to create a database, draft standard contracts, and professionalize the department. But then I went home to my apartment. I looked at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. I looked at my son sleeping in his room, surrounded by secondhand toys. I thought about the child support checks that never arrived on time. I realized I did not have the luxury of idealism. I could not afford to be just another replaceable employee who filled a seat. I needed job security. I needed to be bulletproof. So, I made a choice. I decided to listen to Darlene. I stopped trying to organize the files. Instead, I started memorizing. I learned the names of every vendor's spouse. I learned who liked football and who liked opera. I learned which suppliers were secretly on the verge of bankruptcy and needed early payments to survive. I became the confidant, the therapist, and the problem solver for 17 different companies spread across the United States. When a shipment of oak meant for dining tables was delayed because of a snowstorm in the Midwest, I did not send a formal breach of contract notice. I called the trucking dispatcher, asked about his daughter's college application, and convinced him to reroute a driver to pick up our load at 3 in the morning. The wood arrived on time. Gordon never knew there was a problem. He just saw the finished tables and assumed the system worked. But the system did not work. I worked. Year after year. I absorbed more complexity. I became the bridge between Marrow Slate's impossible demands and the physical reality of manufacturing. I shielded the vendors from Gordon's arrogance, and I shielded the company from the vendors' frustrations. I carried the weight of the entire supply chain in my mind. I told myself I was doing it for the company. I told myself I was being a good employee. But deep down, I knew I was following Darlene's dark wisdom. I was making myself essential by becoming the only person who knew where the bodies were buried. I remember one afternoon, about 5 years in, When I sat at my desk rubbing my temples, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of details I was juggling. My son was sick at school, but I could not leave because a glass supplier in Vermont was threatening to halt production unless I personally authorized a wire transfer. I felt trapped. I felt like the walls were closing in. I thought about Darlene's words. She had told me this method would keep me safe. She had promised it would give me job security. And she was right. I had received raises. I had survived layoffs. I was the go-to person for everything. But as I sat there, listening to the dial tone, I realized the double-edged sword of my position. I had made myself indispensable, but I had also made myself a prisoner. I was the keeper of a kingdom that existed only in my head. If I walked away, it would all crumble. At the time, that thought gave me a strange sense of comfort. It felt like power. I did not know then that power is just a trap waiting to be sprung. I did not know that by making myself the load-bearing wall of the company, I was ensuring that when the earthquake finally came, I would be the one expected to hold up the roof while everyone else ran for safety. I finished the call, authorized the payment, and picked up my bag to go get my son. I told myself I was building a future. I did not know I was building a weapon. I did not know whether I was constructing an escape hatch or locking myself inside a cell. All I knew was that for 11 years, I held the keys, and I never let anyone else make a copy. If you could crack open my skull and look at the way my brain was wired after 11 years at Marrow and Slate, you would not see neurons or synapses. You would see a map of the United States, but not the one they teach in geography class. My map had only 17 points of interest, glowing like distress beacons in the dark. There was a metal fabrication shop in a Rust Belt town in Ohio that produced the brushed brass legs for our best-selling coffee tables. There was a woodworking collective deep in the forests of North Carolina that turned raw walnut into frames so smooth they felt like skin. There was a family-run dye house in the high desert of New Mexico that created the exact shade of indigo linen our designers were obsessed with. And there was a massive glass facility in Pennsylvania that was the only place on the East Coast capable of tempering the oversized sheets we needed for our dining sets. These 17 vendors were the beating heart of the company. Without them, Marrow and Slate was nothing but a logo and a fancy website. And yet, if you looked at the company servers, these places did not exist. We had no customer relationship management software. We had no centralized supplier database. We did not even have proper master service agreements. The entire supply chain of a company generating tens of millions of dollars in revenue existed solely in a chaotic, sprawling archive of Outlook emails and a stack of paper invoices 3 feet high on my desk. It was a procedural nightmare. It was a ticking time bomb. And I was the bomb squad. My days were not spent doing strategy. They were spent fighting fires that nobody else could even smell smoke from. I remember one Tuesday morning specifically. It was 3 weeks before the launch of the autumn collection. I arrived at the office at 7 in the morning to find an email from the New Mexico dye house. The subject line was just the word, problem. The owner, a woman named Elena, who had taken over the business from her father, told me that the latest batch of linen had come out streaked. The humidity in their drying room had spiked overnight. They could not ship it. I did not panic. Panic was a luxury for people who had backups. I knew that if that fabric did not ship by Thursday, the upholsterers in Virginia would have nothing to cover the sofas with. If the sofas were not finished, the photo shoot in New York would be canceled. If the photo shoot was canceled, the catalog would be empty. I picked up the phone. I did not call Gordon. I called Elena. I know you are stressed. I told her, keeping my voice low and steady. I know you want to re-dye the whole lot to make it perfect, but we do not have time for perfect. Elena was crying. She was terrified that we would cancel the contract. She knew Marrow and Slate had a reputation for being ruthless with defects. Listen to me. Elena, I said, send me a photo of the streaks. She sent it. The streaks were subtle. A slight variation in the indigo depth. To a perfectionist like Elena, it was a disaster. To me, it was an opportunity. I called the head of our design team. I did not tell him the fabric was ruined. I told him that due to a unique atmospheric condition during the drying process, the artisans in New Mexico had achieved a rare, variegated finish that added texture and depth to the linen. I called it the Desert Storm Wash. I told him it looked more expensive than the solid color. The designer loved it. He thought it was genius. He approved the variation in 10 minutes. I called Elena back. Ship it, I said, and bill us for the rush delivery. I will approve it. That was the job. I was the translator between the messy reality of manufacturing and the polished illusion of the corporate office. I spent my days negotiating a truce between physics and ego, but it was not just about fixing mistakes. It was about money. Marrow and Slate was notorious for squeezing vendors. Gordon would demand price cuts of 5% every year, regardless of the cost of raw materials. He would delay payments for 60 days, 90 days, sometimes longer, just to keep cash in his own accounts. I became the buffer. I knew which vendors operated on thin margins and would go under if a check was late. I knew the glass supplier in Pennsylvania had a loan covenant that required monthly cash flow. When accounts payable tried to sit on a check for the Ohio metal shop, I walked down to the finance department. I did not yell. I leaned on the desk of the controller and lied. I said, "If that check does not go out today, they are holding the shipment for the CEO's personal office furniture." The check went out that afternoon. It was a constant, exhausting ethical gymnastics routine. I was protecting the vendors from my own employer, and I was protecting my employer from the consequences of their own greed. I was the only reason the bridge did not collapse, but I was burning the candle at both ends to keep it standing. And for all this, for saving the timeline, for massaging the egos, for lying to finance, what did I get? I got Gordon walking past my desk, dropping a lukewarm coffee he had picked up from the break room, and muttering his favorite phrase, "Handle it, Ruby." He never asked how I fixed the linen issue. He never asked how I got the glass shipped during a blizzard. He did not care. As long as the product arrived at the warehouse, he assumed the system was working. He did not understand that there was no system. There was just me, staring at a spreadsheet until my eyes burned. My bonuses were insulting. A $500 gift card at Christmas, a 3% raise that barely covered inflation. To Gordon and the executive team, I was overhead. I was a cost center. I was the woman who ordered lunch and nagged them about invoices. They called me the backbone of the office in toasts at holiday parties. But they treated me like the furniture I helped build, functional, necessary. Invisible. I swallowed the indignity. I swallowed it every single day. I did it because of the photo on my desk. My son was growing up. He needed braces. He wanted to play travel hockey. We lived in a safe neighborhood with good schools, and the rent was high. I looked at my bank account every month and told myself that I was lucky. I had a job. I was essential. I was providing for my boy. That was enough. But there was one moment, about 3 years ago, when the cracks in my resolve truly began to form. I had spent weeks putting together a proposal. I had researched supply chain management software. I had found a platform that would integrate our orders, our inventory, and our vendor communications. It would automate the invoices. It would track quality control. It would create a real database that belonged to the company, not just to my memory. It was expensive, but it would pay for itself in 6 months by eliminating shipping errors. I booked a meeting with Gordon. I wore my best suit. I had printed out charts and graphs. I laid it all out for him. I showed him how vulnerable we were. I explained that if Darlene had not trained me, the company would have stalled years ago. I explained that we needed to institutionalize this knowledge. Gordon looked at the price tag on the last page. He did not even read the benefits section. He laughed. It was a dismissive, short bark of a laugh. "Why would I spend $50,000 on a computer program when I already pay you to do this?" he asked. I tried to explain. I tried to tell him that I was one person, and human beings have limits. I tried to tell him that a company of this size could not run on sticky notes and goodwill. "You are doing a fine job." "Ruby," he said, closing the folder and sliding it back across the desk toward me. "Don't complicate things. We are a furniture company, not a tech company. Just keep doing what you are doing." He checked his watch, signaling the meeting was over. I walked out of his office with my proposal in my hand. I felt foolish. I felt small. But more than that, I felt a cold realization settling in my chest. He did not want to fix the system because he did not value the work required to maintain it. He thought what I did was easy. He thought it was magic. I went back to my desk. I put the proposal in the shredder. I watched the paper turn into confetti. If he did not want a system, I would not give him one. I would continue to be the machine. I would continue to hold every contact, every contract, every secret, and every solution inside my own head. I did not know it then, but that was the moment I stopped being just an employee. That was the moment I became the most dangerous asset in the building. Gordon thought he was saving money. In reality, he was handing me the detonator. All I had to do was wait for the right time to press the button. The beginning of the end did not look like an explosion. It looked like a 26-year-old woman in a designer blazer walking into the office with a latte in one hand and a mood board in the other. Blair Kincaid had officially joined the company. Her title was Brand Strategy Lead, a role that had been created out of thin air specifically for her. She had just finished a graduate program in marketing, or perhaps she had just finished a gap year in Europe. The details were murky, and nobody dared to ask Gordon for clarification. All we knew was that she was here to modernize Marrow and Slate. Modernize, in Blair's vocabulary, meant ignoring the laws of physics. She swept into production meetings with the confidence of someone who had never built a single thing in her life. She did not want to hear about lead times. She did not want to hear about material scarcity. She wanted things to be viral. She used that word in every sentence. She wanted the furniture to look good on TikTok. I remember her second week vividly. She called an emergency meeting to discuss the spring collection. She threw a swatch of fabric onto the table. It was a pale, iridescent silk. "I want the new sectional sofas in this," she announced, "and I want them in showrooms by next month." I looked at the swatch. It was delicate. It was apparel-grade silk, not upholstery weight. If you sat on it while wearing jeans, it would shred. If you spilled water on it, it would stain permanently. "Blair," I said gently, "that is dress material. We cannot upholster a sofa in that. It will not pass the durability testing, and even if it could, the weavers need 12 weeks for a custom run." She rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes at me. "You are so negative, Ruby," she sighed. "Just figure it out, reinforce it with something, and pay them extra to hurry up. My dad says we have the budget." She did not understand that you cannot pay a loom to weave faster than it is mechanically designed to move. She did not understand that durability was not a suggestion. It was a legal requirement for furniture sold in the United States. But Gordon sat at the head of the table, beaming at his daughter's ambition. He saw a visionary. I saw a liability. But Blair was only the first half of the pincer movement that was about to crush me. The second half arrived a week later in a charcoal gray suit and a cloud of expensive cologne. His name was Miles Caldwell. Gordon introduced him as the new vice president of global operations. Miles had come from a massive logistics conglomerate. He spoke in a language entirely made of buzzwords. He talked about leverage, synergy, optimization, and trimming the fat. He had a smile that did not reach his eyes, and from the moment he shook my hand, I knew he saw me as something to be scraped off his shoe. The summons to Gordon's office came on a Friday afternoon. It is the classic time for bad news in the corporate world. They do it then so you have 2 days to cool off before you can sue them or cause a scene. I walked in. Gordon was behind his desk. Miles was sitting in the guest chair, his long legs crossed, tapping on a tablet. "Sit down, Ruby," Gordon said. He did not offer me coffee. He did not ask about my son. He jumped straight into it. "We are restructuring," Gordon said. "With Miles here to take over operations and Blair handling the creative direction, we are moving to a more corporate structure. We need to scale up." I nodded, waiting for the axe to fall. "Miles is going to be revamping the entire supply chain." Gordon continued. "We want you to transition into an administrative support role. You will report to Miles. Your main priority for the next month is to hand over everything. Administrative support." It was a demotion. It was a slap in the face. It was a title for someone who answers phones and books flights. I looked at Gordon. I looked at Miles. "I manage 17 critical vendors." I said, "I handle negotiations. I manage crisis logistics. That is not administrative support. It is now," Miles said. His voice was smooth, like polished steel. "We need to professionalize the relationships. No more mom-and-pop deals. We are going to implement strict KPIs and competitive bidding. I need you to transfer all the vendor data to me by Monday." He held out his hand as if expecting me to hand him a physical key. "I need the master database," Miles said. "The login for the CRM, the contract repository, everything." I almost laughed. I looked at him, and for the first time, I realized just how little they understood about their own company. "There is no database," I said. Miles froze. His smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "We do not have a CRM." I said, "We do not have a contract repository. We have email threads. We have filing cabinets." Miles looked at Gordon. "Is she serious?" Gordon waved his hand dismissively. "Ruby has her own way of doing things. That is why we hired you. Miles, to fix it." Miles turned back to me. His eyes were cold. "Okay, then send me the spreadsheets, the master contact lists, the pricing history." "I do not have a master spreadsheet," I said. "I have the contacts in my phone. I have the pricing history in my head, and in 5 years of individual invoices." Miles put his tablet down. He looked at me with open contempt. "Are you telling me," he said, enunciating every word, "that a $20 million company is running its supply chain based on your memory? I am telling you that I have asked for a budget to build a system for 3 years, and Gordon turned me down every time. I said. I did what I had to do to keep things moving. Miles sat back. He let out a short, sharp breath. He did not believe me. He thought I was holding out. He thought I was gatekeeping information to protect my job. Fine, Miles said. Then your job for the next week is to type it all out. Every name, every number, every deal term. Put it in Excel. I tried to warn him. I tried to explain the nuance. It is not just names and numbers. Miles, I said, you cannot just email the owner of the wood shop in North Carolina and demand a 10% discount. He will walk away. You have to understand how they work. Data is data. Ruby, Miles cut me off. Relationships are inefficiencies. If a vendor cannot meet our metrics, we replace them. That is how real business works. He was looking at me like I was a relic, a dinosaur that did not know the meteor was coming. I left the office. I went back to my desk. My hands were shaking. I had been demoted. I was being ordered to train my replacement, and my replacement was a man who thought human connection was an inefficiency. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the office turned toxic. Miles would stand over my desk, demanding updates on the data entry. When I tried to add notes about a vendor's personal preferences or specific shipping quirks, he deleted them. Just the facts. Ruby, he would say, I do not care about their dog's name. He began to CC Gordon on emails, complaining that I was being slow. He framed my caution as obstruction. He told Gordon I was being difficult. He told him I was resisting the new direction. And then came the final blow. Blair walked into the open office area one morning, clapping her hands for attention. Great news. Everyone, she chirped, to celebrate the upcoming launch of the Founders Edition, and to really solidify our new team dynamic. I have booked a retreat. She held up a brochure for Pine Hollow Lodge. We are going to the mountains, she announced. Next weekend. It is going to be amazing. We will have strategy sessions, bonding exercises, and best of all, a chance to get aligned on the new vision. The room murmured with forced enthusiasm. I stared at my screen. I knew I had to go. It was mandatory. Miles stopped by my desk a few minutes later. He leaned down, his voice low. Bring your laptop to the retreat. Ruby, he said, we can use the downtime to finish the data transfer. I want everything out of your head and onto my server before we get back. I looked at him. He was smiling. It was a shark's smile. He thought the retreat was going to be his victory lap. He thought it was going to be the moment he finally extracted the last bit of value from me before discarding me completely. Blair thought it was going to be her stage to shine as the new leader. They saw the retreat as a fresh start. I looked at the brochure on Blair's desk. Pine Hollow Lodge, 3 hours away, isolated, cold. I did not see it as a fresh start. As I looked at Miles's arrogant face and Blair's oblivious grin, I realized what the retreat really was. It was not a strategy session. It was a funeral for the company they thought they controlled. They just did not know it yet. I will bring the laptop. Miles, I said. Good, he said. And cheer up, Ruby. Change is good. I watched him walk away. Oops. The drive down the mountain was pitch black. The winding roads of the pass were treacherous at night, demanding absolute focus, which was a blessing. I could not think about the humiliation. I could not think about the laughter. I just had to keep the car between the yellow lines. On the passenger seat, my phone buzzed incessantly. It vibrated against the leather upholstery like an angry hornet. Gordon calling, then the HR director, then a text from a colleague asking if I was coming back for the morning session. I reached over and held the power button until the screen went dark. The silence that filled the car was the most expensive luxury I had ever tasted. I did not go home to cry. I went home to sleep. For the first time in 11 years, I did not set an alarm for 6 in the morning. I slept until 7, woke up, made coffee, and showered. I put on my most professional suit. I did not rush. I drove to the office in the morning traffic, listening to a podcast about gardening. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching a movie of my own life. I walked into the Marrow and Slate building at exactly 8 in the morning. The office was quiet. Most of the executive team, including Blair and Miles, were likely still at the lodge or driving back, nursing hangovers and egos. But Gordon was there. Gordon was always there early. It was the one thing I respected about him, though today, it was simply convenient. His door was open. He was reading a newspaper, a half-eaten bagel on his desk. When he saw me stand in the doorway, he lowered the paper. He looked annoyed rather than apologetic. He looked like a man who was ready to deliver a lecture on professionalism. You made quite a scene last night. Ruby, Gordon said. His voice was gravelly. I expect you to apologize to Blair when she gets in. We are a family company. We do not storm out of meetings. I did not step into the room. I stayed by the doorframe. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single white envelope. I walked forward and placed it gently on top of his newspaper. I am not apologizing. Gordon, I said, and I am not storming out. I am leaving. He frowned, looking at the envelope without touching it. What is this? It is my resignation, I said, effective immediately. Gordon laughed. It was a nervous sound, lacking the boom of his laugh at the retreat. Don't be dramatic. You are upset. Take a personal day. We will talk about this on Wednesday. I am not taking a personal day. I repeated, I am quitting. Today is my last day. Actually, right now is my last moment. Gordon finally picked up the letter. He scanned it, and his face went pale. The reality of the timeline crashed into him. You can't do that, he sputtered. We are 6 weeks away from the Founders Edition launch. We have containers on the water. We have production schedules to finalize. You cannot just walk away in the middle of a launch. I looked at him calmly. I thought about the 11 years of missed soccer games. I thought about the nights I stayed up until 2 a.m. tracking shipments. I thought about the dog comment. I said, it is an at-will employment state. Gordon, you can fire me without cause, and I can leave without notice. But the vendors, he said, his voice rising. Miles does not know them yet. He has not finished the transition. You need to stay at least 2 weeks. You have to hand over the contacts. I smiled. It was a polite, professional smile. Miles said data is data, I replied. He has the spreadsheets I typed up last week. He said relationships are inefficiencies. I am sure he will be fine. Gordon stood up. He slammed his hand on the desk. This is unprofessional. Ruby, if you walk out that door now, do not expect a reference. Do not expect severance. I don't expect anything from you. Gordon, I said, I haven't for a long time. I turned around and walked out. He shouted my name, but I kept moving. I went to my desk. It took me exactly 20 minutes to pack up 11 years of my life. I had 2 cardboard boxes. Into them went the framed photos of my son, a coffee mug that said, World's Okayest Mom, a stash of emergency chocolate, and a sweater I kept for when the air conditioning was too high. I left the files. I left the stack of invoices. I left the sticky notes. I left the company phone. The office was starting to fill up with junior staff. They watched me with wide eyes, sensing the energy shift. They knew something big was happening. I saw Darlene's replacement in HR peeking out from her cubicle, but she did not approach me. No one came to say goodbye. There was no cake. There was no card. The people I had worked with for over a decade stayed glued to their screens, terrified that if they acknowledged me, they would catch the contagion of my insubordination. I carried my boxes to the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, I saw Miles walking out of the elevator bank across the hall, fresh from the retreat, looking tan and rested. He saw me holding the boxes. He stopped. He looked confused for a split second, and then he smirked. He thought I had been fired. He thought he had won. I let the doors close on his smirk. I walked to my car. I loaded the boxes into the trunk. I sat in the driver's seat and took a deep breath. The air smelled like exhaust fumes and freedom. For the next 3 days, my personal phone did not stop ringing. I had blocked the office numbers, but they called from cell phones. Gordon left 6 voicemails. The first 2 were angry. The third was bargaining. He offered me a 10% raise. The fourth was threatening legal action for abandonment of duty, which I knew was a bluff. The fifth was pleading, Ruby, the fabric for the sectionals is stuck in customs. He said in the message, the broker will not talk to Miles. Call me back. I deleted it. Then Miles called. He left a message that was clipped and arrogant. Ruby, pick up. The password you left for the logistics portal is not working. Stop playing games. I had not left a password because there was no portal. It was a personal login I had created on my own time. I deleted the message. The HR director sent an email to my personal address threatening to withhold my final paycheck if I did not return company property. I replied with a photo of the company phone sitting on my empty desk. I spent those 3 days doing things I had not done in years. I cleaned my apartment. I cooked a lasagna from scratch. I went for a walk in the middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday. I watched the birds. I realized how tight my shoulders had been, how my jaw had been clenched for a decade. On Wednesday evening, my son came into the kitchen. He was 17 now, tall and observant. He had watched me pacing the floor for years, always tethered to my phone. He saw me chopping vegetables at 5 p.m, the phone nowhere in sight. Mom, he said, leaning against the counter, you really quit. I nodded. I did. Are we going to be okay? He asked. He meant money. He meant the future. I looked at him. I felt a surge of fear. Yes, but it was cleaner than the dread I used to feel every Sunday night. We will be fine, I said. I have savings, and I have a brain. He took a piece of carrot from the cutting board. You look different, he said. I put the knife down. How you look like you are actually here, he said. I hugged him then. I held on tight. He was right. For 11 years, I had been physically present but mentally located somewhere between a shipping container in Long Beach and a sawmill in North Carolina. I had given Marrow and Slate the best years of my cognitive life. I am here now, I whispered. I released him and went back to cooking. The phone on the counter lit up again. It was a number I recognized. It was the owner of the metal fabrication shop in Ohio. He was calling my personal line. I hesitated. I liked him. He was a good man. But if I answered, I would be sucked back in. I would be solving their problems again. I let it ring. The screen went dark. They thought I was punishing them. They thought I was sitting at home, wringing my hands, waiting for them to beg so I could feel important. They thought this was a negotiation tactic. They were wrong. I was not angry. Anger implies that you still care about the outcome. Anger implies that you are still engaged in the fight. I was not fighting. I had simply done the one thing they never expected. I had taken my hand off the gear, and without my hand to hold it steady, the teeth of their precious machine were about to grind each other into dust. It started with a single phone call on a Thursday morning. 4 days after I walked out. It was not from Marrow and Slate. It was from a number with a Pennsylvania area code. I recognized it immediately. It was Frank, the floor manager at the glass tempering facility. He was a man of few words, usually grumpy, who had worked in glass for 40 years. He never called just to chat. I picked up. Frank, I said. How are you? Who is this guy? Miles Frank asked. His voice was tight with irritation. He just called me. He demanded I move your order up by 2 weeks. He called me Buddy. I have been doing this since before he was born. I don't like him. I sighed. I am sorry. Frank, I don't work there anymore. Miles is the new VP of Operations. There was a long silence on the line. Then Frank swore, a colorful, inventive string of curses. You quit, he asked. I did. I said. Then who is going to approve the variance on the thickness for the coffee tables, Frank asked. We have the glass on the cutting table right now. I don't know. Frank, I said honestly, that is Miles's job now. Well, Miles told me he doesn't want to hear about variances. Frank grumbled. He told me to just get it done. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Ruby, if we cut it the way he wants, it will crack in the shipping containers. I felt the old reflex kick in. The urge to fix it. The urge to tell Frank to adjust the temper setting by 5 degrees and bill it as a rush charge. But I stopped myself. I was not being paid to fix it. And more importantly, I had no authority. Frank, listen to me, I said, keeping my voice clear and deliberate. Do not do anything on a verbal order. If he wants you to cut it, make him send you an email specifying exactly what he wants. Get it in writing. Protect yourself, but we have always done it on a handshake. Ruby, Frank said, because I trust you. I know, I said gently, but I'm not there. You need to look out for your business now. Don't cut a single sheet of glass until you have a purchase order with the correct specs signed by him. Frank grunted. Got it. Thanks. Ruby, you are a good kid. He hung up. That was the first domino. By Friday afternoon, the floodgates had opened. My personal phone was buzzing every hour. It was the woodworkers in North Carolina. It was the textile weavers in New Mexico. It was the metal shop in Ohio. The story was the same every time. Miles had called them. He had been arrogant. He had been dismissive. He had treated these proud craftsmen and women like vending machines that were malfunctioning. He told me my prices were inefficient. The owner of the dye house told me, sounding close to tears. He said he could get the same linen from China for half the price. I told him to go ahead and do it then. He demanded to see our safety logs. The metal fabricator said, Who does he think he is? OSHA. To each of them. I gave the same advice. I did not badmouth the company. I did not tell them to stop working. I simply told them to follow standard business practices. Get a contract. I said, get a deposit. Do not ship until the invoice is paid. It was simple advice. It was professional advice. But in the ecosystem of Marrow and Slate, it was a death sentence. Miles, in his infinite wisdom, decided that the vendors were bluffing. He thought they were just trying to squeeze him. So, he escalated. On Monday of my second week of unemployment, I heard from Darlene's old friend in accounting that Marrow and Slate had sent out legal letters, a blanket email blast from their external counsel to all 17 key vendors. The letter was aggressive. It reminded the vendors of their contractual obligations to meet the production schedule for the Founders Edition. It threatened legal action for any delays. It used words like breach of contract and damages. It was a bold move. It was also a stupid one. Because as I had tried to tell Miles, and as Gordon knew but chose to ignore, there were no contracts. The response from the vendors was swift and brutal. I heard about it from the owner of the upholstery shop in Virginia. He called me, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Ruby, you are not going to believe this," he said. "They threatened to sue me for breach of contract, so I called my lawyer." And you know what he said? He said, "Ask them to produce the contract." So did you. I asked. I did. He said, I sent them an email back. I said, "Dear Mr. Caldwell, please forward the signed contract you are referring to. In the meantime, please note that your account is 90 days past due." That was the twist that Miles had missed. In his rush to optimize, he had not looked at the accounts payable aging report. Gordon had been floating the company on the vendor's goodwill for years. He paid them late, sometimes 3 or 4 months late. They tolerated it because I called them and reassured them. They tolerated it because I made sure the critical checks went out just in time. But without me, and with Miles insulting them, the goodwill evaporated. Suddenly, 17 vendors realized at the same time that they were holding hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid invoices, and they realized that the company threatening to sue them had no legal leg to stand on. The emails started pouring into Marrow and Slate. "Please be advised that all production is on hold until outstanding balance of $42,000 is paid in full. We are ceasing operations on your order due to lack of a valid service agreement. Future shipments will be cash on delivery only." The Founders Edition was not just stalled. It was being held hostage by the very people Gordon had underestimated. Miles tried to backtrack. He tried to call them. He tried to be charming. But it was too late. He had already shown his teeth. When he called the glass factory, Frank didn't even pick up. He just forwarded the call to his voicemail, which was full. I sat in my apartment, drinking tea, watching the rain hit the window. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not doing this. I was not pulling strings. I was simply letting gravity take its course. Then came the text from Gordon. It popped up on my screen at 8 in the evening. "You are vindictive," it read. "You are destroying this company because of a joke Blair made. Grow up. Ruby, fix this." I looked at the message. I thought about the water bottles. I thought about the laughter. I thought about the way he had dismissed my request for a system as a waste of money. He still didn't get it. He thought this was personal. He thought I was actively sabotaging him. He could not conceive of a world where his company failed simply because it was poorly run. I typed a reply. My fingers moved steadily over the glass screen. "I am not destroying anything. Gordon." I wrote. I just stopped saving it. I hit send. I put the phone down. The silence in the room was not empty. It was full of possibility. The machine was breaking, gear by gear, and for the first time in my life, I was not the mechanic. I was just a witness, and the view was spectacular. The first week of my unemployment felt less like a vacation and more like a recalibration of my own biology. For 11 years, my cortisol levels had been permanently set to fight or flight. I was used to waking up with a racing heart, already mentally drafting apology emails for delays I did not cause. Now, I woke up to the sound of birds and the smell of coffee that I actually had time to drink while it was hot. I drove my son to school in the mornings. I did not check my email at red lights. I cooked dinner without a phone propped up against the cutting board. I even organized the linen closet, folding towels with a meditative slowness that felt like a luxury. It was a detox. I was flushing the toxicity of Marrow and Slate out of my system, one quiet hour at a time. But silence, I learned, has a way of becoming loud. By the 5th day, I found myself checking my phone just to make sure it was still working. The chaos had been terrible, but it had also been purposeful. Without the fires to put out, I felt a strange, hollow space where my adrenaline used to be. Then came the call that changed the texture of the silence. It was Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of repotting a fern on my balcony when my phone buzzed. It was a number I did not recognize, but the area code was local. I wiped the soil from my hands and answered, expecting a telemarketer, or perhaps another panicked voicemail from a Marrow and Slate junior manager. "This is Ruby," I said. "Hello, Ruby." My name is Rowan Pike. The voice was calm, low, and distinct. It lacked the frantic urgency I was used to hearing from people in the industry. I am the CEO of Juniper Bridge Partners. He continued, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I paused. I knew the name. Juniper Bridge was a boutique firm, much smaller than Marrow and Slate, but they had a reputation for quality. They acted as a high-end intermediary, connecting artisan workshops with luxury retailers who wanted to sell ethically sourced goods. You are not disturbing me, I said, leaning against the railing. How did you get my number? I got it from Elena at the dye house in New Mexico, Rowan said, and Frank in Pennsylvania, and about 3 others. I felt a spike of defensiveness. I hope they did not get you involved in the mess with my former employer. I am not looking to be a consultant for that disaster. Rowan chuckled softly. No, Ruby, they are not asking for help with Marrow and Slate. They are telling me that I need to hire you. I stood up straighter. Excuse me, I was on a call with Elena yesterday discussing a new textile line, Rowan explained. She was upset about how she had been treated by your successor. She told me that the only reason she had stayed with that contract for so long was because of you. She said, and I am quoting here, that you were the only person in a suit who ever treated her like a human being. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had spent years thinking I was just a buffer, a shock absorber. I did not realize I'd been building a legacy. I would like to buy you a coffee, Rowan said. I want to talk to you about what we do at Juniper Bridge. I agreed to meet him the next morning. I chose a small, independent cafe downtown. Neutral ground. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a blazer over jeans, professional, but not corporate. Rowan Pike walked in right on time. He was in his late 40s, wearing a corduroy jacket and looking more like a university professor than a CEO. He shook my hand firmly and ordered a black tea. He did not start with a pitch about revenue or growth targets. He started with a question. Why did you stay there so long, he asked. It was a direct question. It caught me off guard. I needed the job. I said simply, I have a son, and I thought I was essential. You were essential, Rowan said, but you were essential to a broken machine. He took a sip of his tea and looked at me with an intensity that was unsettling but not unkind. I run my business differently. Ruby, we are not as big as Marrow and Slate. We do not have their volume, but we have something they don't. We have the trust of the makers. He opened a leather folder and slid a piece of paper across the table. It was not a job description. It was a manifesto. Fair contracts, fair pay, documented properly. That is our motto, Rowan said. We don't squeeze vendors. We partner with them. We pay a deposit of 50% up front. We have clear timelines, and most importantly, we have ironclad contracts that protect both sides. I looked at the paper. It was everything I had begged Gordon for. It was the holy grail of supply chain management. So why do you need me, I asked. If you are already doing this, what is my role? Rowan leaned forward. Because we are growing, and as we grow, I am terrified of losing that personal touch. I need someone who understands the human element of logistics. I need someone who knows that a delayed shipment is usually a family crisis, not a laziness issue. He named a salary. It was about 10% less than what I had been making at Marrow and Slate. I know it is a step down in pay, he admitted. We are a smaller ship, but I can offer you something Gordon never did. I looked at him, waiting for the catch. I can offer you sanity, he said. I hesitated. The money was tight, but manageable. The real issue was the trauma of the last decade. Rowan, I said, choosing my words carefully. I appreciate the offer, but I need to be honest. I am burned out. I spent 11 years carrying an entire company's logistics in my head. I was the database. I was the filing system. I do not want to be that person again. I do not want to be the one who cannot take a vacation because the knowledge is locked in my skull. Rowan smiled. A genuine, warm smile. That is exactly what I do not want, he said. He tapped the table. I am not hiring you to be the database. Ruby, I want to hire you to build the database. I blinked. What I want you to come on as our director of vendor relations, Rowan said. But your first project is not chasing orders. Your first project is to lead the standardization of our entire network. I want you to design the contracts. I want you to build the workflows. I want you to create a system so robust, so transparent, and so efficient that you could disappear for a month and the company would keep humming. He sat back. I don't want you to carry the load. Ruby, I want you to build the vehicle that carries it for us. I stared at him. For the first time in my career, someone was asking me to use my brain. Not just my memory. He was asking me to institutionalize the empathy and logic I had developed over a decade. You want me to write the rules, I asked. I want you to write the code of ethics, Rowan corrected. I want you to create the standard for how artisans and retailers should work together in America. It sounded too good to be true. It sounded like the kind of promise that vanishes after the first quarter. How do I know you mean it, I asked. How do I know I won't just be chasing invoices again in 6 months? Rowan pulled a document out of his folder. It was an employment contract. Read page 4, he said. I flipped to the page. There was a clause under key responsibilities. Employees shall have full autonomy to implement and enforce ethical sourcing standards. Employees shall not be required to engage in predatory negotiation tactics. Employee is mandated to document all processes to ensure redundancy and work-life balance. It was in black and white, a legal guarantee of a healthy work environment. I looked up at Rowan. He was watching me. You are not a bottle picker. Ruby, he said, referencing the story Frank had told him about the retreat. You are a relationship architect. I want you to build bridges, not just cross them. I felt a shift inside me. It was the feeling of a lock clicking open. The shame of the last week, the feeling of being a discarded servant evaporated. I was not a servant. I was an expert. And for the first time, I was sitting across from someone who knew the difference. I picked up the pen. I have a few conditions. I said, name them. Rowan replied. I want full control over the vendor onboarding process. I said, and I want Fridays to be meeting-free so I can focus on the documentation. Done, Rowan said without hesitating. I signed the paper. As I walked out of the cafe, the sun was shining. I checked my bank account on my phone. The balance was lower than I would have liked, and the new salary would take some adjusting to. But as I walked to my car, I realized something profound. I was not just trading one job for another. I was trading a life of being a secret weapon for a life of being a builder. Gordon had used me as a crutch to support his broken leg. Rowan was asking me to help him build a house that could stand on its own. I got into my car and looked at the dashboard. My phone was silent. No panic, no emergencies, just a calendar invite for my first day at Juniper Bridge. I started the engine. For the first time in 11 years, I was driving toward something, not just running away. The ink on the contract was still wet when Elena, the owner of the New Mexico dye house, looked up at me with tears in her eyes. We were sitting in the conference room at Juniper Bridge, a space that smelled of cedar and fresh coffee. Not fear and ozone. You mean that if the retailer cancels the order after I have already dyed the wool, I still get paid? Elena asked. Her voice trembled slightly, as if she were waiting for the trap to snap shut. I pointed to Clause 4, Paragraph 2. I do not mean maybe. Elena, I said softly, it is written right there. 50% deposit upon ordering, and the remaining 50% is guaranteed once production begins. Regardless of downstream cancellation, you are not a bank. Elena, you should not be financing our client's inventory risk. Elena let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a decade. She signed the document. For the first time in our long professional relationship, she did not look like a woman bracing for impact. She looked like a business partner. This was the new reality I was building. At Juniper Bridge, we were not burning bridges. We were reinforcing them with steel and concrete. Rowan Pike had given me the autonomy he promised, and I was using it to systematically dismantle the culture of exploitation that was standard in our industry. We reached out to the vendors I knew, the metal workers in Ohio, the woodshop in North Carolina, and we offered them something radical: safety. We did not steal them from Marrow and Slate. We simply offered them a life raft while the ship they were on was sinking. They climbed aboard, not because I asked them to, but because they were drowning. But the real turning point, the moment where the scales truly tipped, happened 3 weeks into my new role. Rowan called me into his office. He had a strange expression on his face, half amused, half serious. We just received an urgent request for proposal, Rowan said. It is from Sterling Home Goods. My eyebrows shot up. Sterling Home Goods was a massive national retailer. They were the whale that every supplier wanted to land. They were also the primary launch partner for the Founders Edition at Marrow and Slate. Why are they sending an RFP now, I asked. The fall season is already locked. Apparently not, Rowan said. He slid the email printout across the desk. They have a hole in their inventory. A massive, Founders Edition-sized hole. Their current supplier has defaulted on the delivery timeline 3 times in the last month. They are looking for a replacement vendor who can execute a high-end living room collection in 12 weeks. I read between the lines. Marrow and Slate had choked, without the vendors on board, and with Miles Caldwell trying to optimize relationships that were already dead. They had missed their shipping windows. Sterling Home Goods was furious, and they were looking for a savior. We can do this. I said, I know the capacity of the network. If we simplify the design slightly to account for the rush, we can hit that date. We went to the pitch meeting 2 days later. I walked into the Sterling headquarters flanked by Rowan and our head designer, the buyer. A sharp woman named Cynthia, who I had only ever emailed, looked up as we entered. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me. Ruby Stewart, she asked. I nodded. Good to see you. Cynthia, I thought you were at Marrow and Slate. She said, I have been trying to get a straight answer out of a man named Miles for weeks. He keeps telling me the delay is due to global shipping headwinds. I sat down and opened my folder. I cannot speak to what is happening there, I said diplomatically, but I can tell you that the headwinds are manageable if you have the right sales. We did not badmouth my former employer. We did not need to. We simply laid out our plan. We showed them the signed contracts with the vendors, the very same vendors Sterling loved. We showed them our transparent pricing model. We showed them a production schedule that was based on reality, not wishful thinking. Cynthia looked at the proposal. Then she looked at me. You have the capacity, she asked. I have the trust. I corrected. And in this business, that is the only capacity that matters. We walked out of that building with a $2 million contract. We did not steal it. Marrow and Slate had dropped it, and we just happened to be the ones standing there with a glove. The backlash was inevitable. 2 days after the deal was announced in the trade papers, the rumors started. I began receiving messages from old colleagues. Miles was telling everyone who would listen that I had stolen proprietary company data. He was claiming I had downloaded the master database before I left and used it to poach their supply chain. I sat in my office at Juniper Bridge, reading a cease and desist letter that Marrow and Slate's legal team had sent to Rowan. It accused me of misappropriating trade secrets. Rowan looked concerned. Did you take anything? Ruby, any files, any lists? I laughed. It was a genuine, hearty laugh. Rowan. I said, there was no database to steal. That was the whole problem. I drafted the response myself. I explained that the contact information for the vendors was publicly available to anyone with Google. I explained that the relationships were personal, not contractual property, and then I added a line that gave me immense satisfaction. I wrote, any information regarding vendor history is currently residing in the sent items folder of the email account I used for 11 years. The fact that Marrow and Slate management cannot locate or organize this data is an operational failure, not a theft. They never responded to the letter. They knew I was right. They were trying to sue me for their own incompetence, but the universe, it seems, has a sense of humor darker than my own. While the legal threats were fizzling out, a bomb went off in the court of public opinion. It was a Friday night. I was at home, watching a movie with my son. When my phone started blowing up, it was not work emails this time. It was social media notifications. A former assistant at Marrow and Slate, a young woman who had quit 2 days after I did, had posted a video to a private industry group on Facebook, but nothing on the internet stays private. The caption read, "This is why I left. Leadership at its finest." I clicked the link. The video was shaky, filmed surreptitiously from a lap or under a table, but the audio was crystal clear. It was the retreat. I saw the blurry image of Blair standing on the stage, water dripping from the table. I heard the silence of the room, and then I heard the voice that had haunted my dreams for weeks. My dog is smarter than you. The camera panned slightly, just enough to catch the back of my head as I knelt on the floor. And then, it captured the laugh. Gordon's loud, booming, red-faced laugh. The video cut to black as I stood up. It had gone viral. It had jumped from the industry group to Twitter, and from Twitter to TikTok. The hashtag toxic nepotism was trending. The hashtag corporate horror was trending. People were furious. The internet does not like bullies, and it really does not like rich, out-of-touch bosses humiliating their staff. The comments were brutal. Imagine being a CEO and laughing while your daughter degrades an employee. Trash. I will never buy furniture from these people again. Who is the woman on the floor? She handled that with more dignity than that whole family has in their pinky fingers. My name was not mentioned in the video, but anyone who knew the industry knew it was me. I watched the view count tick up. 50,000, 100,000, 500,000. Marrow and Slate was not just losing contracts now, they were losing their brand. They were being exposed as exactly what they were, a shiny veneer over a rotten core. Then, the phone rang. It was Gordon. I stared at the screen. It was 9 at night. He never called this late unless the building was on fire. In a way, it was. I answered. "Hello, Gordon. Ruby," he said. He sounded breathless, panicked. "You have seen it. I have seen it. I said, you need to help us. He said, the board is freaking out. Investors are calling. We need to put out a joint statement. A statement, I asked. Yes, Gordon said. We need you to say it was an inside joke. Say that you and Blair are friends. Say that the video is taken out of context. We will pay you. We will pay you a consulting fee. $50,000. Just write a post on LinkedIn clearing this up. I listened to him. I listened to the desperation in his voice. He was offering me money to sell my dignity. He wanted me to be the janitor one last time. He wanted me to clean up the mess his daughter had made. Just like I had cleaned up the water bottles, I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. Gordon, I said quietly, you are not listening. What do you want? He demanded. 100,000 Ruby. This is destroying the company reputation. The reputation you earned. I said. I looked over at my son, who was watching me from the sofa. I do not do PR for cruelty. Gordon, I said, I cleaned up your messes for 11 years. I am done. But he started. Good night. Gordon. I hung up. I blocked the number. My son looked at me. He had seen the video. He knew what they had done to me. Are you okay? Mom, he asked. You should ruin them. You should go on the news and tell everyone everything. I sat down beside him. I took the remote control and turned off the TV, silencing the noise of the world. No, I said. Why not, he asked. His teenage face flushed with righteous anger. They deserve it. You should stomp them into the ground. I put my hand on his shoulder. Listen to me. I said, that is not how we win. I looked him in the eyes. Revenge is not about stomping them down. I told him, it is not about screaming or fighting in the mud. Revenge is standing up so straight, so tall, and so successful that they are forced to look up and see exactly who they forced to kneel. My son looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. You are already taller than them. Mom, he said. Yes, I said, leaning back into the cushions. I think I am. The video would continue to circulate. The brand would continue to burn. But I would not add a single log to the fire. I had a contract to fulfill, a team to lead, and a life to live. And for the first time, none of it belonged to them. The news did not come to me through a phone call or a rumor. It arrived in my inbox at 6 a.m, delivered by the Furniture Industry Daily Newsletter. It was the lead story, bold and undeniable. Marrow and Slate suspends. Founders Edition launch. Amid supply chain collapse. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, and read the article. It was an autopsy of a disaster I had predicted months ago. The article detailed how the company had been forced to issue full refunds to over 3,000 customers who had pre-ordered the collection. It mentioned that major retailers were invoking penalty clauses for non-delivery. It estimated the financial loss in the millions. The article quoted an anonymous insider who described the internal situation as chaotic and directionless. I knew that insider was probably a mid-level manager I used to have lunch with, someone watching their annual bonus evaporate, because the people at the top thought they could replace relationships with intimidation. By noon, the human cost of that headline became clear. My LinkedIn feed began to populate with the green banners of people looking for work. Marrow and Slate had initiated a reduction in force. They were cutting costs to stop the bleeding. The junior designers, the warehouse staff, the customer service reps, innocent people were losing their livelihoods because Gordon and his team had gambled on arrogance and lost. But the axe did not just fall on the innocent. It swung for the architects of the failure, too. I heard from Darlene's friend in HR that Miles Caldwell had been terminated. He was walked out of the building by security, carrying a single box, leaving behind a legacy of burned bridges and a confused staff. His optimization strategy had optimized him right out of a job. And Blair. She was the owner's daughter, so she could not be fired, but she could be hidden. The newsletter mentioned that she had been reassigned to oversee showroom operations. It was a humiliating demotion. The girl who wanted to be a global brand strategist was now going to be fluffing pillows and greeting customers in the retail store, far away from the boardroom where she had spilled those water bottles. I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, certainly, but also a heavy sadness. I had spent 11 years helping build that place. Watching it crumble was like watching a house you used to live in burn down, even if the landlord had been terrible. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I did not have saved, but I recognized the area code. It is Miles. Do you have 5 minutes? I'm not recording this. I just want to ask you something. I debated ignoring it. I owed him nothing. But curiosity is a powerful force. I walked out to the balcony of the Juniper Bridge office and dialed the number. He answered on the first ring. Hello? Miles. I said, Hi, Ruby? He sounded different. The slick, corporate veneer was gone. He sounded tired. He sounded like a man who had been running a marathon in concrete shoes. I saw the news. I said, Yeah. He said, It is a mess. Gordon is looking for blood. I was the easiest target. There was a pause. I waited. I just wanted to know. Miles said, his voice dropping lower. How did you do it? Do what? How did you get the glass guy in Pennsylvania to expedite orders without a contract? He asked. I offered him 20% over asking price, and he told me to go to hell. You never paid him extra. I looked out at the city skyline. I asked him about his grandkids. Miles. I said, what I asked about his grandkids. I repeated. I knew his wife had surgery last year. I knew he was worried about passing the business on to his son. I didn't just call him when I needed something. I called him when I didn't need anything, just to check in. Miles was silent. I could practically hear his brain trying to process this data point. I thought that was just small talk. He said, I thought it was inefficient. Small talk is the work. Miles, I told him, it is not the wrapper around the job. It is the mortar that holds the bricks together. You tried to build a wall without mortar. You just stacked bricks on top of each other and hoped gravity would hold them. But when the wind blew, it all fell down. He let out a long sigh. I really messed this up. Didn't I? Yes, I said. You did. I expected him to ask for a referral. I expected him to ask if Juniper Bridge was hiring. If he had, I would have hung up, but he surprised me. Thanks for the lesson. Ruby, he said, good luck with the new gig. He hung up. He did not apologize for treating me like a secretary, but he had admitted he was wrong. For a man like Miles, that was likely the closest he would ever get to redemption. I went back to my desk. I had actual work to do. I was drafting a new ethical sourcing agreement for a ceramicist in Oregon. I was building, not destroying. 2 hours later, the phone rang again. This time, it was the main line of the Marrow and Slate showroom. I picked up, assuming it was a misdirected call from a vendor. This is Ruby. There was a hesitation on the other end, a breathy, uncertain silence. Ruby. It is Blair. I froze. I had not spoken to her since the retreat, since she looked at me with that imperious sneer and compared me to her dog. Hello, Blair, I said. My voice was cool, stripped of any warmth. I wanted to call you. She started. She sounded younger than 26. She sounded like a teenager who had crashed her father's car. I saw the video, the one online. I didn't post it. I said quickly, I know. She said, I know you didn't. You wouldn't do that. She paused. I am sorry. Ruby. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch. Apologies are easy when you have lost. They only mean something when you are winning. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. She rushed on. It is just... Growing up with my dad, that is how he talks. He always told me that if you are nice to staff, they will walk all over you. He told me that you have to establish dominance early or people won't respect you. I listened to her. I realized then that she was a monster of Gordon's making. She had been raised in a petri dish of toxicity, taught that cruelty was a leadership skill. She wasn't just mean. She was uneducated in the ways of being a decent human. That is a lie. Blair, I said, I know that now. She whispered, I am in the showroom. The customers. They look at me like I am garbage. The sales staff won't talk to me. I feel so small. You are feeling what you made me feel. I said, I know, she said, her voice cracking. And I am sorry. You were the only one who actually did any work. I see that now. I closed my eyes for a moment. I could have crushed her. I could have told her that she was a spoiled brat who deserved every bit of misery she was getting. It would have felt good for about 10 seconds. Blair, I said, I appreciate the apology. So you forgive me, she asked, hope creeping into her voice. No, I said, I don't. The hope vanished. Forgiveness takes time. I told her, and it takes action. You are in the showroom now. That is a good place to start. Learn how to sell a sofa. Learn how to talk to a person who is spending their hard-earned money. Learn the names of the people who work with you. If you do that for a year, maybe then we can talk about forgiveness. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, I will. I hung up. I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a parent who had just disciplined a child that wasn't mine. I packed up my bag to leave. It had been a long day of emotional reckoning. I was looking forward to seeing my son, to eating dinner, to forgetting about Marrow and Slate. I walked out to the reception area. The receptionist, a bright young woman named Sarah, looked up. "Ruby, a courier just dropped this off for you," she said. She handed me a thick, heavy envelope. It was from a law firm. Not the one Marrow and Slate usually used. A new one. An expensive one. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I opened the envelope right there in the lobby. I pulled out the cover letter. The words swam before my eyes, heavy with legal jargon. Civil action, Marrow and Slate Living versus Ruby Stewart. Complaint for misappropriation of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty, and tortious interference with business relations. They were suing me. I scanned the document. They were claiming that my memory, my knowledge of the vendors, my relationships, the very things they had refused to document was their property. They were claiming that by leaving and working for a competitor, I had stolen their proprietary business intelligence. They were seeking damages. They were seeking an injunction to stop me from working at Juniper Bridge. Gordon. He realized he couldn't guilt me back. He realized he couldn't buy me back. So now, he was going to try to destroy me legally. He was blaming me for the collapse he had engineered. I looked at the papers. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from a white-hot rage. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about files and data. He didn't understand that you cannot sue someone for being competent. You cannot sue someone for having friends. I put the papers back in the envelope. Sarah looked at me, concerned. "Is everything okay?" "Ruby." I looked at her. A smile touched my lips. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who knows exactly where the bodies are buried, and who has just been handed a shovel. "No, Sarah," I said, "everything is not okay." I tucked the lawsuit under my arm. "But it is about to be very interesting. Gordon wanted a fight. He wanted to drag this into a courtroom. He wanted to make me the villain of his story so he didn't have to look in the mirror. Oops, he had forgotten one thing. In a courtroom, everything gets entered into the public record. Every email, every unpaid invoice, every toxic directive. He wasn't suing me. He was inviting me to testify, and I was more than ready to take the stand. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. It was not the dramatic, high-ceilinged arena you see on television. It was a windowless room with fluorescent lighting and a carpet that smelled of industrial cleaner, but the stakes were high enough to make the air feel thin. Gordon sat at the plaintiff's table. He was wearing a navy suit that looked expensive, but he looked diminished. His face was gray, and he refused to make eye contact with me. Beside him sat two lawyers from a high-priced firm, their table covered in binders that I knew were mostly empty fluff. I sat on the other side with my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Elena, provided by Juniper Bridge's legal insurance. We had one thin folder between us. The hearing was for a preliminary injunction. Marrow and Slate wanted a court order to stop me from working for Juniper Bridge for 12 months. Their argument was that I was causing them irreparable harm by utilizing their proprietary trade secrets. Gordon's lead attorney stood up. He was a man who clearly loved the sound of his own voice. "Your Honor," he began, gesturing dramatically toward me. "Ms. Stewart was a trusted confidant of the executive team. She had access to the entire supply chain network of Marrow and Slate. She has taken that confidential network, a network built over decades, and transferred it to a direct competitor. This is a clear misappropriation of company assets." The judge, a woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked down at the motion. "Counsel," she said, her voice dry. "I see the allegation, but I'm looking for the employment contract. Specifically, the non-compete agreement signed by the defendant." Gordon's lawyer shifted his weight. "Well, Your Honor, as we have noted in the brief, Ms. Stewart was a long-term employee. While a formal non-compete was not updated in her recent file, her fiduciary duty serves as an implied contract." The judge raised an eyebrow. "So there is no non-compete," she asked. "There is an implied duty of loyalty," the lawyer insisted. "And what about the trade secrets?" the judge asked. "You claim she stole a database. Do you have a log of the files she downloaded? Do you have a forensic report showing a data transfer?" The lawyer cleared his throat. He looked at Gordon, who was staring at the table. "The database, Your Honor, was intellectual. Ms. Stewart memorized the proprietary information." The judge took off her glasses. She looked at me, then back at the plaintiff's table. "Let me understand this," she said. "You are telling me that your client, a multi-million-dollar company, kept its entire supply chain inside an employee's head, failed to have her sign a non-compete, and now wants to ban her from earning a living because she remembers the people she worked with for 11 years. Gordon's lawyer opened his mouth to argue, but my lawyer, Elena, stood up. "Your Honor, if I may," Elena said calmly, We not only reject the claim that these relationships are trade secrets, but we also have evidence that the plaintiff is using this lawsuit to cover up their own negligence and financial misconduct. Gordon's head snapped up. This was the part he did not expect. Elena opened our thin folder. We have sworn affidavits from 17 independent manufacturing vendors, she said. She handed a stack of papers to the bailiff to give to the judge. These documents show that Marrow and Slate has been structurally delinquent on payments for years, Elena continued. Furthermore, we have emails sent by the plaintiff's new management threatening these vendors with baseless legal action if they did not prioritize their orders. Ms. Stewart did not steal these vendors, Your Honor. The vendors fled a toxic business partner and reached out to Ms. Stewart for safety. The judge flipped through the pages. Her eyes scanned the numbers. She saw the 90-day overdue notices. She saw the threatening letters from Miles Caldwell. This is significant, the judge muttered. Then Elena played her final card. Additionally, Your Honor, regarding the claim of a confidential and professional environment, we would like to submit into evidence the video recording from the company retreat, which is currently public knowledge. It speaks to the hostile work environment that compelled my client to resign. I saw Gordon flinch. He knew the video. Everyone knew the video. The judge waved her hand. I have seen the clip. Counsel. It is not relevant to the trade secret statute, but it certainly paints a picture of why the defendant might want to leave. The judge closed the file. She looked directly at Gordon. Mr. Kincaid, she said. Her voice was stern. I am denying the motion for an injunction. You cannot sue an employee for your own failure to keep records. You cannot claim ownership over human relationships, especially when you have treated those relationships with such disregard. Gordon looked like he had been slapped. And I would caution you, the judge added, if you proceed to a full trial, all of these financial records regarding your debts to vendors will become part of the public record. Given your current reputational challenges, I suggest you consider whether that is a wise path. The gavel came down with a sound that felt like a heavy door slamming shut on the past. We walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. Gordon and his lawyers came out a moment later. Gordon looked at me. For a second, I thought he might yell. I thought he might throw one last insult, but he didn't. He looked at me, and I saw something I had never seen in him before. Defeat. He looked old. He realized that the machine he thought he owned had never really been his. It had been mine. And now that I was gone, he was just a man in a suit with a lot of debt and no one to fix it. He walked away without a word. 2 days later, my lawyer received a notice. Marrow and Slate was dropping the lawsuit with prejudice. They signed a settlement agreement ensuring they would never pursue this again. I did not ask for money. I did not ask for an apology. I just signed the paper and sent it back. Silence was my victory. The following Monday, I walked into Rowan Pike's office at Juniper Bridge. He was sitting at his desk, reviewing the sales figures for the new line we had launched for Sterling Home Goods. The launch had been flawless. The furniture was beautiful, the delivery was on time, and the vendors had been paid in full. He looked up and smiled. You beat them, he said. I survived them. I corrected. There is a difference. Rowan shook his head. No. Ruby, you beat them. You proved that doing business the right way is actually a better business model. He opened his drawer and pulled out a document. I have been thinking, Rowan said. We are growing fast. The systems you built in the last 2 months are scalable. You didn't just plug a hole. You built a foundation. He slid the document toward me. I don't want you to be an employee anymore. Ruby, he said, I want you to be a partner. I looked at the document. It was a grant of equity. It was an offer of ownership in the company. I don't want you to ever feel like you are just a pair of hands again. Rowan said, I want you to have a stake in what you are building. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name next to his. I was not just a vendor relations manager anymore. I was a co-owner of a company that treated people with dignity. That evening, I took my son out to dinner to celebrate. We went to his favorite Italian place, the one with the checkered tablecloths and the garlic bread he loved. We sat in a booth near the window. He was laughing, telling me about a test he had aced in history class. I watched him and felt a profound sense of peace. The knots in my stomach were gone. The phantom ringing of my phone had stopped. Mom, he said, pausing between bites of pasta. Do you remember what that lady said to you, the mean one? I took a sip of my water. I remembered every syllable. Yes, I said. I remember. My dog is smarter than you, my son quoted, shaking his head. What a stupid thing to say. I smiled. I thought about Blair, stuck in the showroom, trying to learn humility the hard way. I thought about Gordon, sitting in his empty boardroom. I thought about the fetch game. You know, I said to my son, she wasn't entirely wrong. He looked at me, confused. What do you mean? Well, I said, a dog can learn to fetch a stick in 2 days. It is a simple trick. It makes the owner feel powerful. I leaned forward, but learning how to respect other human beings. Learning that you cannot build a kingdom by stepping on people. Some people spend their entire lives trying to learn that and they still fail. My son grinned. So you are saying you are smarter than the dog, I laughed. I am saying that I am smart enough to know when to walk away. I said, and that is the only intelligence that matters. I paid the bill. We walked out into the cool night air. I did not look back. Being underestimated had been painful. Yes, it had burned like acid, but as I walked toward my car, toward my new life as a partner, toward a future I owned, I realized that the fire hadn't destroyed me. It had forged me. I was not the one who had been dropped. I was the one who had finally learned how to fly. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Ruby's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button so we can share this story with even more people.